So I'm Bianca Ryzek, and I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Cape Town. And I'm going to talk today about the capabilities approach as a needs assessment framework for vulnerable non-motorized transport users in 3 different African cities. And this was a joint project, and I'll go into that when I launch the presentation. So is it okay if I share my screen now? Right, so what we wanted to do was, in our case study cities in South Africa, Rwanda, and Zambia, the needs of vulnerable non-motorized transport users, or NMT for short. These different groups have not been prioritized in planning policies and practices. Hence, the aim was to contribute to the development of qualitative understandings of the needs of vulnerable NMT groups. And so we did this in coordination with another project run by multiple agencies within the UN and external partners. And their aim was essentially to capacitate their stakeholders to translate NMT into various capabilities through related groups of enabling factors. And so this was all part of a larger VREF grant project that specifically aimed to provide a theoretical framework for understanding NMT needs amongst vulnerable NMT groups in different African cities, and also to provide a vocabulary to aid in the inclusive design of access system interventions. So just really briefly, this was the organization of the project. So the University of Cape Town was the project lead in the project and fulfilled the coordination, capacity development, and administrative support role. And then the University of Rwanda, Zambia, and Cape Town were all of our in-country technical partners, and they made use of their existing relationships in the field, ensured that there was a continuation of knowledge and capacity development within each of the countries. And then together with them, so with the project team and the in-country partners, what we did was we developed the various data collection instruments, and the in-country partners then took those instruments and then conducted the various interviews and focus groups. So there were 4 objectives in this project. So they were to form an understanding of the different motivations for NMT travel in each of the 3 cities among the different vulnerable groups. Then the second, to identify the conversion factors that acted as facilitators or barriers to different motivations for NMT. Then the third was to understand the similarities and differences of these motivations and barriers or facilitators in relation to different urban contexts present in the cities in each country. And then the fourth point was, through the analysis of the first 3 objectives, to propose a needs assessment framework based on the mobility capabilities of vulnerable NMT groups in African cities. So what we did was we started off by questioning the idea in transport planning that proximity equals access. And this assumption you can see kind of in the different transport models that we use, the SDG 11.2 indicator that we measure, and the increasingly popular 15-minute city concept. However, if we view mobility through the lens of Amartya Sen's capability approach, which is diagrammed here, you can see that the proximity does not necessarily mean access. So the term capabilities refers to a collective set of options a person is free to choose from. And the functionings are a subset of these capabilities. So what a person chooses to do given the various opportunities they have access to. And then the resources are the goods and services available. However, knowing which resources are available is not sufficient to necessarily knowing which functionings an individual can achieve. And that's because of the various conversion factors. So these are personal, social, environmental, different sorts of factors that either limit or enable what a person is able to achieve through the resources available to them. And so, for example, conversion factors such as a sidewalk, benches to rest on, incline grade, these are all different aspects that determine whether or not, for example, an elderly individual is able to make use of walking as a mobility means to achieve desired. To utilize the capabilities approach to explore the experiences and needs of vulnerable users make in terms of capabilities. In a simplified illustration of travel decision, service or resources enable them, and what mobility options they have before making a choice and translating decisions into action. And so this simplified illustration here basically just omits a lot of the nuance of human decision making, but it does describe the foundational rationale behind much of transport. For example, using things like travel data and iterating back and forth until the result is a robust estimation of travel choice. But the problem here is that a key assumption in this framing of travel behavior is often that each person is capable of choosing any destination or mobility option. But that's not necessarily the case if we apply the capabilities approach to travel decision processes. So when people actually travel to a destination, it's conventionally because they want to access an activity, service, or resource that they desire to be involved in. And so, for example, a person's place of employment is an important destination for them to access, not because of necessarily where that employment area is located, but rather because of the different things that getting to being employed allows them to access. So things like earning a salary, working with colleagues, knowledge development, that sort of thing. And because of the importance of the opportunities that people want to access, we name these destinations capability resources. And then mobility resources, on the other hand, represent all the mobility-based options available for a person to physically access. And like the capability resources, such as a bus, and even a bicycle or sidewalk, those sorts of things. So an important point to just remember is that not every person is capable of using every mobility or capability resource, whether they want to choose it or not. So there are different environmental, social, political, physical, informational, and personal factors that expand and constrain individuals or groups can achieve through mobility. Furthermore, barriers impact individual social demographic groups differently. For example, females might be more sensitive to security concerns than their male counterparts. And then there are also facilitators, which are the factors that support the use of capability and mobility resources, such as universally accessible urban design, facilitating access for people with disabilities and the elderly. So together, these facilitators and barriers act as a filter, allowing through only the resources that an individual is actually capable of using to achieve further capabilities. So traditionally, data collection tends to focus on travel behavior choices given a theoretical set of options, and to a degree, it is assumed that this data reflects the choices that individuals actively make, and the resulting analysis paints a picture of users' current state of accessibility. However, unlike the theoretical accessibility that transport models assume is available to everyone, the personal set of capabilities reflects the true collection of options that a person can choose from. And that is, current data available does not help a planner differentiate between a user that does not desire to utilize a resource and therefore choosing not to access it, and a user not being able to access a resource that they want to use. So this is a pretty key difference. So the disparity between the theoretical set of capabilities or theoretical accessibility provided by the transport system and the personal set of capabilities of the user is significant for vulnerable NMT users because of the magnitude of barriers that they face. Understanding the effect of these barriers and filtering out potential capabilities is pretty difficult in transport planning because the capability step in that planning process is missing. So this leads to glaring problems like the inability to measure the trips that users needed to take, but for example, couldn't. So just to quickly illustrate all of that through an example. Okay. So I'm just going to start off. So when you cut the video and stitch it together, I'm going to talk about case 2. So, right. Yeah, in case 2, the barriers and facilitators of access to the resources are unfavorable to the users. So 90% of the available capability and mobility resources are filtered out, leaving only 10% to choose from. An example of this case would be a poor female who cannot afford to take public transport despite living far from her job and has to walk at certain times of the day due to safety concerns. So in traditional data collection methods, you would see that these two cases kind of look identical if you just measure them by their actions and look at that data. But that's pretty problematic because it says nothing about the different levels of access each person actually has. So what the capability approach does is it helps illuminate these differences in capabilities or access and can help reveal the motivations behind the trips that vulnerable NMT users do take, as well as the unrealized mobility that is desired but unavailable due to personal or systemic factors. It also aids in differentiating between choosing not to access capability resources like schools because of a lack of interest in schooling and not being able to access schools because of a lack of available options, just as an example. So how do we go about applying this approach to our project? So what we did was we first conducted face-to-face interviews using semi-structured questions with youth NMT users, so people between the ages of 18 and 23, who didn't have access to motorized forms of transport. And that involved about 30 people each in Kigali, Lusaka, and Cape Town. And then, so what we did was in those interviews, we asked several questions, specifically targeting barriers to mobility and the resulting barriers to accessing different capabilities. And these included hypothetical questions around mobility in a scenario where heavy rains might prevent access to a respondent's normal route of travel, to more experiential questions of times when the respondent was not able to partake in an activity because of mobility imposed limitations. And then we focused on conducting different focus groups using a similar set of questions that were that built on the initial semi-structured interviews, but modified to reflect different suggested changes from the interview experiences. And then also, of course, to make sure that these questions cater to a larger group rather than individuals. And then these focus groups included 8 to 15 female NMT users older than 18 years. And so we found several barriers and facilitators to NMT use. So barriers and facilitators to accessibility played out differently in the 3 cities. Pedestrian right-of-way was a major concern in Kigali, and the unique hilly topography was found to be a limiting factor in how far respondents could move by NMT. And that would be things like embarrassment because of showing up sweaty at a social function, that sort of thing. Things that you might gloss over, but actually can really impede mobility for people. And then in Lusaka, the lack of designated sidewalks and cycle paths for pedestrians and cyclists was mentioned repeatedly as a barrier. And on the other hand, though, in Cape Town, accessibility was described as a 2-part problem. So access to alternative transport modes was limited by affordability or safety concerns, and access to employment activities within a short distance was sparse. And then just quickly about personal safety. So personal safety while walking or cycling was a shared concern between both male and female respondents across all the cities. So in Kigali, personal safety was more related to road safety concerns. In Lusaka, safety was related to the fear of violence and robbery. And in Cape Town, a fear of crime was also prevalent, but it was more towards fears of sexual assault, particularly amongst the female vulnerable NMT users. And so in these cities where crime was a concern, participants shared that their choice of a route was dependent on the likely occurrence of a crime, even if this meant taking the longest route. So in other words, crime was such a concern to them that sometimes if there was no way to take their usual route to get to their destination, that might mean just staying at home. So there were various social norms that were presented as soft barriers to NMT access. In Lusaka and Kigali, exposure to dust and heat resulted in unfavorable conditions for pedestrians who would arrive at their destination sweaty and dirty. And that made it really difficult to attend, like especially formal events, like weddings where there were expectations around cleanliness. In Cape Town, women voiced their dissatisfaction with the fact that bicycles are socially acceptable for men, but not particularly for women. And then sweat, dirt, and gender norms were not only problems inherently tied to the lack of capability or mobility resources, but rather social constructs and stigmas that prevent individuals from realizing their full capabilities. And so what the capabilities approach did was it added value by revealing the extent of social barriers like these that are invisible to most conventional transport data collection and analysis methods. On the other hand, there were some nice things that came out about NMT that people were happy with. So walking presented opportunities for socialization that respondents from Cape Town, Kigali, and Lusaka all cited as a major benefit. And not only does it provide a chance to grow and maintain current friendships, but it also, the respondents mentioned that it was an opportunity to make new friends along the way and grow their social network. And many respondents described increased social cohesion that results from interacting with their community on the street as a pedestrian. So walking in groups of friends had the added side effect of providing a sense of safety and security, as well as making the perceived time spent traveling seem shorter. So exposure to the local environment, encountering new stimuli provided also inspiration and new perspectives. So many respondents in all three of the cities cited various aspirations that inspired or that were inspired by their walks as one of their favorite aspects of their commute. So they used that time to listen to new music, contemplate important life decisions, reflect on recent events, or even as a form of just meditation. And these societal co-benefits, along with the more obvious health and exercise related ones, are often overlooked by conventional transport planning practices, as they don't tend to appear in the data collected by the traditional practice of observing transport actions. So this is a really important point here about proximity not being equated to access. So Cape Town has a high level of proximity to services and opportunities when you look at the three cities, but crime-related barriers to mobility drastically reduce the access that residents can utilize and restricts the set of capabilities that people can choose to enact and degrades the livelihood of those dependent on NMT, while constraining their ability to change their fortunes in any material way. And so this might be a really extreme example, but it really illustrates the essence of the provocation: proximity is not access. So what we did in this project was we focused on the capabilities approach to allow vulnerable NMT users a way of sharing their stories to help planners understand and assess the costs that access deprivation takes on the lives of the vulnerable, as well as to advocate for the targeted intervention to expand their capabilities. And our participants shared various stories of missing different opportunities, so like funerals, missing like being able to meet up with their friends and family. And even though these trips cannot be taken under quite a few of the current conditions, most vulnerable people still vocalize a desire to walk and cycle to destinations. So for every walking or cycling trip we see in the three cities, there are many more that vulnerable users might want to take. And this untapped realization of access and ultimately economic and social value will be an enticing prospect for decision makers and local leaders to invest in when they have the tools or the framework to evaluate it. And this is what framing that investigation of NMT vulnerability within the capability approach has helped reveal: those trips not taken. And that's all. Thank you. Cool. I don't know if the host can hear me, but that was the end of that presentation.
Thank you, Bianca. Thank you.
Thank you, Bianca.
I think,
hello.
I can't tell if the, oh.
Okay, my name is Dr. Catherine Gateri, a lecturer at Kenyatta University. My background is urban and regional planning, and I'm currently interested in transportation research, inclusiveness, and governance. And this about to present a project that is funded by VREF on mainstreaming inclusivity in urban related projects in Kenya. So I will share my screen now. Yeah, and so this is a project that is funded by VREF, and the project is a collaboration between the University of Zambia, Lusaka University, Kenyatta University in Kenya, and Multimedia University in Kenya. And the title of the project is Mainstreaming Inclusivity in Urban Mobility Related Projects in the City of Nairobi, a case of Nairobi Expressway project. And we are just presenting one bit of the research. It is a comparative approach, but for this session, we will just present the findings from the Nairobi case study. And now we ask, where is the woman's voice? The research team consisted of Dr. Wilma Nchito from the University of Zambia, Dr. Gladys Nyatiel from Multimedia University of Kenya, and Edward Chibwiri, Institute of Economic and Social Research in Zambia. So we asked, what is inclusive governance? And basically this refers to a normative sensibility that stands in favor of inclusive as the benchmark against which institutions can be judged. It is process-based inclusion, refers to how decisions are made, who is involved in decision-making processes, how are they involved, why are they involved, whose voices count, and how these voices shape the nature and quality of decisions that are implemented. And the extent to which governance is more or less inclusive has to do with ways in which people and groups that have been traditionally left out or marginalized, and that is the women, the young people, the racial, ethnic, and religious groups, or the disabled groups have been left out. So we look at how are they able to participate and to exert a greater influence in the political processes and also hold government authorities to account. So which approach have we used? As per the literature, the tools which can help engage with the nexus of infrastructure and inclusion include life cycle analysis, participatory planning, social equity audit, and universal design. For our study, we have used the life cycle analysis, our conceptual framework based on the OECD framework for the governance of infrastructure. And the methodology that we adopted was secondary data, because we're looking at policies, community surveys, which helped us to generate our primary data, focus group discussions, and using the data collected from these secondary and primary sources, we analyzed the women's participation in the project life cycle and how the woman's voice is heard or unheard. The objectives of the research were many, but for this particular dissemination of knowledge, we have picked upon just two specific objectives, and that is stakeholder analysis of urban mobility related institutions and their role in urban mobility in Nairobi, and then undertaken an inclusive analysis of urban transport programs along the project cycle using the Nairobi Expressway project. So the OECD framework, which is what we have adopted, and then we asked along the project cycle, who is included in decision-making processes? How are they included? Why are they included? And whose voices count? And how do these dynamics and interactions shape both the nature and quality of decisions taken and implemented? And we look at what is the representation of male and female at every cycle? How is a woman heard, represented at every cycle? And that is the OECD framework, as the cycle has the first stage, which is the evaluation of infrastructure needs. After the evaluation of the infrastructure needs, then we have decision and prioritization of the infrastructure project, then the infrastructure project preparation, the construction phase, and the last phase, which is the operation, delivery, maintenance. So what we did is looking at this cycle in terms of inclusiveness. Where does the woman, how is the woman's voice taken care of, or listened to, or incorporated? Does it count? Is it there? So the first objective, which is to stakeholder analysis of urban mobility data institutions and their role in urban mobility in Nairobi, we found that using the OECD framework, which is evaluation of infrastructure needs, decision and prioritization of infrastructure project preparation, construction, operation, delivery, and maintenance. For this particular project, the implementing agency and the institution in charge of policies and regulations is the Ministry of Transport, Infrastructure, Housing, Urban Development, and Public Works. And that is in the Department of Transport, the Road Transport Division in Kenya. And the institution in charge of that, or the implementing agency, is the Kenya National Highways Authority, KENHA. And this being the organization that is in charge of everything, all these, the project cycle, we look at what is the representation of that, of the woman in the institution. The top management has 3 men. That is the cabinet secretary is a man, the chief administrative secretary is a man, and the principal secretary is a man. So basically the top management does not have any woman representative. And so we ask, how is the woman's voice heard at this level? Then we have the board of directors. The KENHA board of directors has 10 members. And out of the 10 members, we have 2 women and we have 8 men. And so again, we ask, are the 2 women, is it enough representation? Is it enough to drive the woman's agenda? Is it enough to really represent the needs of the woman in road infrastructure projects? Then we have the technical team. We've not been able to get the actual numbers of the technical team, but as we go along with the discussion, we will actually just be able to find that the representation of the technical team at KENHA is actually quite low. So the professional employment opportunities. The road sector is an engineering sector. And we looked at the engineering profession, and we managed to get data from 2019, where the engineering technologists, we have 92% male, and the females are 8%. The registered engineers, the registered consulting engineers, we have 96% male and 4% female. The licensed ASIA experts, we have 79% male and 21% female. The registered professional engineers, 94% male and 6% female. Then the registered graduate engineers was 86% male and 15% female. And this speaks a lot about the road sector employment and representation of the women. Because the employment opportunities in the road sector are found in road agencies, as well as professional firms that provide services to the road sector. And these potential employers will usually recruit experts ranging from graduate level to professional experts. And given the data that we have here, there are very few females to be even recruited from. Then the sector data has meant that is 74.39%. But even this 25.61% does not reflect the technical personnel of the women representative, because we find there's the storage industry, and we tend to find that women will more be in the storage industry as opposed to the technical aspect of the road construction. And in support of this, KENHA's experiences that majority of the contractors and those involved in road construction are men. And we have the source of that data. It is 2019 source. Then we undertook a community survey, and as per the finding responses, that is the females and the males that were able to reach or to talk to. The bicycle users, we did not manage to get any female. The border users, the same. The commercial truck drivers, 0. The hawkers, we got 69%. for the female and that 31% for the male. And this also speaks a lot that the women are not actually in the construction, in the transport industry per se. As the female representation was 9%, the male was 91%. The matatu touts and the 43% in the female category and 57% the male category. The mkokoteni or the cat pullers, we call them mkokoteni, 0% female, 100% male. The pedestrians, 55%, and the male, 45%. And this also speaks a lot about who walks, who is walking. And we find that it is a woman. And so how are the needs of the woman taken care of? Well, we are actually finding that they are not represented at the top level or the transportation sector. The private car users, 53% female and 47% male. And this also, the 53% private car users is, we actually made an effort to look for the woman motorists because we realized that it is the easiest way to find female respondents because there are many as opposed to the female workers in the transportation sector. Then the public transport user, still 55% women are more than the 45% men. The taxi drivers, the female was 6% and the males were 94%. Then the tuk-tuk drivers, 0% female and 100% male. And the gender responses, the females were 39% and the male 61%. And so we also asked from this, we actually went out to look for the female and the male. We actually went out looking and to get the voices from all the population. But even us, despite the fact that we really tried, we were still not able to access the female the same way we were able to access the male. And so we continue asking the woman's voice, where is it? Where will it be heard? Or how is it heard? Then we had a question on the awareness of Nairobi Expressway project, and we find that less women are aware and more men are aware of the project. The women had 89% in terms of awareness and 95% for the men. Then we did a focus group discussion, and also the attendance by the women was very, very poor. We actually got 20%. And this is despite the fact that we actually made a concerted effort to include and facilitate the women to attend, but they still did not attend. So we ended up hearing more and more of the men's voices as opposed to the woman's voice. And so we asked, why the lack of the women's voice, or why the lack of the woman's voice? Through literature review, focus group discussion, and key informant interviews, we find that the scarcity of women in decision-making positions in policy and transport planning, it is very scarce. And this, our study has validated that. The systematic failure to integrate the voices of women users in the consultation and planning of transport systems. And as we saw in the project life cycle, the representation is very, very low. It is basically like, it is nothing, because the decisions are made at the top management level, but the woman representation at that top management level is not there. And then the growth of automobile-dependent societies indicates an intentional disregard of the mobility needs of women. And the current study findings included other factors as follows: the work-life balance. For female employees across all cadres of the subsector of childbearing age, work-life balance often takes priority over career progress. So the woman will opt to first of all work before venturing into work or into the career. Then the security concerns. The road construction opportunities are there, but the professional women will fear for their security in cases such as sexual harassment or the inadequate amenities in the field-based work, where we find the construction camps carry the risk of not having amenities critical to a conducive work environment. For example, lack of gender segregated toilets or toilets with no doors, inadequate waste disposal facilities, lack of private rooms for nursing mothers, lack of water for personal hygiene. And all these inadequacies make field-based opportunities unattractive to women due to the higher health risk. And then we have low uptake of gender policies in the workplace to guide gender inclusion in staffing, despite the fact that we have so many policies towards incorporation of gender or mainstreaming gender in institutions. There is a low uptake. Then the low uptake of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM-based careers by women, and this affects the skills, and this affects the representation in this transport sector, which is very mathematical based or engineering, technology, engineering based. Then we have the perception. There's this perception that broad sector careers considered male dominated, and the work is too hard due to the physical labor involved or working with rough male colleagues, or the risk of sexual harassment in a male-dominated workplace. And this perception just puts off most women from looking for these opportunities. And these perceptions and concerns are a major contributor to the lower numbers of women who would be eligible to apply for employment opportunities in the transport road sector. So how do we make the woman's voice to be heard? In Kenya, we have the necessary policies, but we need implementation. There's need for deliberate effort. We have the gender policy of 2011. We have what we call 30% public procurement preferences for women entrepreneurs. We have the UWESO Fund, and if there was expansion of access to finances and promote women-led enterprises at the constituent level through the UWESO Fund, it is there, but the uptake is also not very high. We have the Women Enterprise Fund. We also have programs that encourage women in STEM. And then there's the issue of public participation. We need to look for easier ways of reaching the women. When we were undertaking this research, we tried, and we really tried, but still we were not able to get the number of women representation that we would have wanted. So we would really ask to be more innovative, to include women participation for inclusivity. And I leave with one woman's voice who said, in the focus group discussion, she said, they're able to reach us when looking for votes. Let them look for us the same way when implementing the projects. Everyone has a phone in Kenya. Tell them to send us messages. We shall respond. Thank you. This marks the end of my presentation.
Then I'm Vivien Meli. I'm sociologist, in the University of Chiang. I'm associate professor, and I'm working on the questions of transport since around 15 years. And I have first of all focused on the rural transport. And I have the opportunity with VREF project to work on the urban transport, especially on the governance and the co-production of governance in the sector of the transportation. I want to apologize because I have a bit poor English, and sometimes I can have some wrong word or wrong pronunciation. Thank you to you all. After introducing myself, I want to do a presentation on a project which is financed by VREF, and the title is Negotiating the Control over Transportation at the Urban Margin, Dynamics in Governance, Co-production in Informal Mobility in Abidjan in Côte d'Ivoire and Douala in Cameroon. I want to precise that it is a comparative research. I'm a team leader of the group. We have two teams. One team is in Côte d'Ivoire, and the second one is in Cameroon. Yes, you have the outline of the presentation, but I will not stay on. The situation of what motivated our proposition for this research. We realized that knowledge and representation of actors in urban transport governance is very specific in West and Central Africa region. There is strong interest in the literature for formal and institutional actors, and very little interest in informal transport actors. They also focus on informal mode of transport, such as minibuses, collective taxis, motorcycle taxis, and the contribution of the various actors to the reconfiguration of public space. There is a little interest in informal urban transport governance. We realize there are some challenges in African cities. We have a demographic challenge. With projection, there will be 1 billion inhabitants in Africa cities in 2040. You have urbanization challenge. There is a rapid urban sprawl with poor planning.
Can we pause for a second? I don't know when to change the slide. So I've been on, I think, the wrong slide the whole time.
Okay, let me.
You have to tell me next
each time
when to, yeah. Because
okay.
I don't know what your slides say. Sorry.
Okay.
Can we go back?
Are you right now?
Sorry?
You want to go back to which slide?
Well, I've been on the title slide for most of the time because I didn't know which part.
Yes, let's go to the slide 5.
Hold on. All I can see is the big slides. I can't see numbers of the slides or anything.
Background and rationale, the challenge of African cities.
Okay. Yeah, just tell me next for to change the slide.
Okay, thank you. Good.
Okay, cool.
Then I was saying that in Western Africa region, we have the challenge of urbanization. There is a rapid sprawl with the poor planning and decision making. We have also the situation of urban economic challenge, where here the economy is dominated by the informal sector. Next. We have a comparative situation on in relation with the challenge of the city, and the comparative situation is the one of Abidjan and the one of Douala. The city of Abidjan and Douala have a great similarity in terms of urban sprawl and transport supply. You can realize that in less than 40 years, they have more than double in floor area. Then the situation is the cities, the urbanization growth is going horizontal form. And this situation next. And this situation bring out some problem, research problem in relation with that urban spray. And the problem is that there is margin who we created in urban cities of Douala in Abidjan. We have, for example, geographical margin. We have also social margin and symbolic space margin. Also, transportation in those zones, in those margin, bring out the logic, a specific logic and practices of the app and expression of the vitality and creativity of actors to contribute to the governance of transport, to improve the mobility offer in these cities. Next. There is, in this city, an urban transport crisis in relation with governance challenges. We can see that transport needs far exceed the current supply, which is sometimes inadequate. Despite this improvement, the supply remains limited to meet the need of the growing urban population in terms of quality and quantity. The urban transport dominated by the informal economic sector with diverse stakeholders, and the lack of policy of coordination between different actors. And there is an urban transport governance, and the urban transport governance is of key importance, is a key importance in African cities. Next. The challenge of urban governance is that urban public institutions, the government among a large number of governmental actors, there is clear trend toward the devolution of responsibilities in institutional and to institution and local and regional levels, as now the decentralization is going on in Cameroon and in Côte d'Ivoire. Despite the importance of the informal sector, the informal actors are perceived as perpetrators of urban disorder and chaos, but these actors are currently of urban transport. There is a need to bring together key actors of urban governance in collaborative process to jointly develop and implement. And what we want to propose, we are thinking about, it is about co-production of governance. The co-production of governance is a governance which can bring out all the stakeholders together to improve the quality and the quantity of the transport in the cities. It is to make, to put in place a sustainable transport in the cities. And how can this marginal actor contribute to the transport governance in African city? This is the main question that we use to organize our work. On this question, we have this general objective, which is to assess the dynamic of peripheral urban transport actor in 2 African cities, evolving at the margin of government plan, activities, and logic in order to contribute to the co-production to urban transport governance in Africa. You have 3 specific objectives. The first one is to map informal transport activity and actor in the urban margin. The second one, to evaluate the role of urban transport actor at the margin in connecting people to goods and services, space and culture in order to assess their contribution to urban transport governance. And the third one is to define the determinant of an inclusive engagement of urban transport stakeholder in transformative interaction for the co-production of governance in order to improve qualitatively and quantitatively to mobility offer in African cities. Next. The methodology approach, you have 3 approaches. We have what we call a maximalist approach, which will be to collect data in entire cities of Africa, of Abidjan and Douala, to document the urban and transport merging. The second approach, it is a minimalist approach, which in the form of case study will identify specific comparable area of Abidjan and Douala for a deep study. And the third approach is a multi-stakeholder workshop on the co-production determinant of governance in urban transport. Next, we have a description of the different methodological approach, the activities, and the techniques to be used. I think it's not necessary to go inside. I want to go to the, please, next slide, please. I want to go to the preliminary finding, because we have did the first, we have operationalized the first approach of our methodology, which is the maximalist approach, which was to collect data in the entire cities of Douala and Abidjan. We have 2 approaches. We did a collection of cartographic data and collection of institutional and organizational transport data. For the first, the preliminary finding then, the first result was that a dynamic of informal urban transport sector characterized by a pronounced socio-technical creativity of actors, the creation of new station and stop, new transformation mode and practices, the use of different modes of transportation, the example of the waterway, where the boat of fishermen are used to transport people from one point to the another. This is the case of Douala. The second finding is that the increased presence of invited actors in informal urban transport in both cities, despite governmental decision limiting their activities. We have also conflict of interest and competencies between the central government and municipalities over the regulation of transport activity on the urban margin. Next. The other reason, as we can see, I don't know if it's visible, as we can see on the maps, on the informal transport seats in Abidjan, in Douala, we can just remark that both in the city center and in the urban margin, in the cities of Abidjan and Douala, in Abidjan, informal transport is operating. You can see that there is a spray of informal seats in the cities of, or informal seats of informal transport in the cities of Douala and the city of Abidjan. Next. The means of transport, of informal transport in Abidjan, in Douala, there is a diversity means of informal transport, both in Abidjan and in Douala. The informal urban transport dominated by minibuses, which are called Baka, and tricycle, which are calling Salomi in Abidjan, and motorcycle, which is called Benskin in Douala. Then these means of transport dominate the informal transport in Abidjan and Douala. And there is an important use in Abidjan and low use in Douala of water body for transportation. Next. And our last finding is the permanent presence of various actors. And we collect data on by seeing how different actors of transportation, either formal or informal actor, are in the cities, in the seat of transportation in the different cities. We realize that there is a common presence and permanent interaction on the field between various actors of urban transport, including various informal actors of urban transport, municipality, police, and administration. This, at the end, is an important perspective of co-production of transport governance in Abidjan and Douala. And this approach of co-production is how we want to test this inclusivity of the transport activity in the West and Central Africa. Thank you for understanding, for hearing me. Thank you, everyone.